Welcome to FinOps in Action. I'm your host, Alon Arvatz. Each week, I'll sit down with FinOps experts to explore the toughest challenges between FinOps and engineering. This show is brought to you by Point 5, empowering teams to optimize cloud costs with deep detection and remediation tools that drive action. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of FinOps in Action. Today, I have a very special and interesting guest. His company went all in with AWS in 2019 and completed the migration in 2024. That makes them the first hospitality company to become fully on cloud. He just celebrated his, listen carefully, 20th year at his current company, and the manager of FinOps was his 10th role. I'm happy to welcome Cloud FinOps Manager at Choice Hotels International, Mike Routier. Mike, how are you today?
I am fantastic. How you doing, Alon?
Doing great. Mike, please share with us what should be the FinOps practitioner's top priority?
For me to find proper success here, not like how I phrase that, of course, is always being curious. You first start out in this role and you're thinking, I just want to boil the ocean. I want to save the company so much money. But as I've been doing this now for what feels like, I believe it's now been 6 years, the idea behind that, and when I say it, is the evolution of just cloud services. So when I think of FinOps, first thing I think of is public cloud. It is always evolving. So once you're in this, it's never stopping. Whether or to be a service that exists, new features are enhanced, you're growing in different multi-clouds, whatever that is. And so to even be relevant, I feel like you just have to remain curious to know what's out there in the platforms, what services are available, why are teams doing what they're doing. That's, just to be relevant. The other thing I think of with being curious is just knowing what your customers need. I came into this thinking I need to do proper cost allocation, we do chargebacks, how to have fancy reports, start telling everybody what they need to start doing to start saving money. It's sort of almost like aggressive, but just being demanding, right? And again, once I understood all these different personas in technology and finance and what do they see they would need for me to be successful, growing over time. I'm not trying to say you do this all at once, but it's been once I started trying to understand where they're coming from, made it so much easier. So just being relatable and authentic, right? It's not just, I'm just trying to fake this. I have fun doing this job, but part of that is being curious because then I understand what they want for me to be. I find success, they find success. It's always evolving into that idea that we're just a great partnership. And I just love propagating happiness. No, that's the big guy there.
Very interesting. And you talk about curiosity and how it is important when we work in such a dynamic environment where cloud always changing. I wonder, how do you today, keep yourself up to date with everything that's happening in cloud and around that?
I would say it's driven by what does our product team and our platform team see as what they're driving towards, not just them, but even InfoSec, whatever that is. I would find it impossible to keep up with all the opportunities and services provided cloud providers. It's more of, I do check-ins with all my app owners, cross-center owners, domains, whatever phrasing you like. And the idea is that it's bi-directional. Here's a conversation where I see your footprint in the cloud. At the same time, what do you see as planning? It goes back to forecasting, but understanding where do they see their roadmaps? What do they have on deck for this year, maybe even next year? And if we're rolling with AWS, so of course we use VPCs. There's VPC lattices, other ways of doing VPCs. Are we looking at other ways of doing networking and doing, or the way we're doing egress, whether it be through transit gateways, what have you, right? I don't need to know all the nuances of everything that a VPC can do. I need to know what do we plan to do as a company. And then I know where to start plugging myself in. If we're thinking about evolving and modernizing our workloads, so if we're running on EC2s and we're going to start adopting ECS or EKS, what do I need to know about those nuances so I can still have proper tag governance or whatever that is with provisioning. So I get my happy guardrails for a happy cloud cost management provisioning, cloud conscious behaviors. At the same time, I'm not stopping behavior. I want to make sure we're always modernizing and scaling in the cloud and having a good time at the same time. So it's finding that happy medium to know what we're planning to see where I fit in.
That's very interesting. And I hear you saying happy, having a good time. It's really great to hear that. I can tell you that for me, also as an entrepreneur, it's very important to also enjoy the ride, not only grind all day. And I wonder, is that a philosophy of yours? And do you also try to like convey this message to your team as well?
Absolutely. Yes. How do I think of this? We do this job wherever you're going to get plugged in, right? And we're all in this big ship together. If I think about what we really do. And at the end of the day, it's not like we're really saving lives. I think of FinOps. Usually people save money. Yes. But I just want people to have it just be a nature of empowerment. I don't want to be this idea of a control mechanism. I want to empower them to do what they need to do, but also know that they're doing it at a well enough pace. If I go back to the principles of FinOps, usually we think of right sizing and cloud waste management, all those fun things. And the idea is, how do we just help mitigate that at the front end? If I'm no longer of this idea of labeling folks as doing good or bad, but more of here's like a good way of provisioning in the cloud. I work with teams to do proper guardrails. Then we don't really think of it that way. We just now start thinking of it as, what's my footprint? Is it scaling at what we expected? Is it, whatever that conversation is, depending on who that persona is, does it feel right? And so I do a lot of feelings, of course, definitely how I'm speaking to this, but that's to me the end of the day. And it's like, oh, now I understand why, how all these things connect. And it just bridges this gap of, this is my role, this is your role. Now we're in like a happy community. And how do we figure this out together?
And you mentioned working with engineering or your platform team in the context of waste reduction. So waste reduction was tagged as the top priority for FinOps practitioners by the latest State of the FinOps report. And I would be happy to double down on that. And I'm curious, how deep do you expect yourself as a FinOps leader to get into the waste reduction process? How are you engaged into mapping the waste, into driving engineers to take action? How do you look at it?
I will say we are definitely decentralized when it comes to FinOps. It's not a Mike show a choice. So at least I try to get out of the way of that. I keep saying this idea of empowerment. That's definitely happening. But we definitely have, through, I would say, technology leadership, idea of just good cloud cost consciousness. So people want to do well. It's more of, how do I do well to make sure I'm leveraging the right reporting, tooling to know what opportunity am I not leveraging. That's usually what the conversation is. It's not, hey, you're misbehaving. Here's 100 load balancers that haven't been touched in a month. Please go clean those up. Yeah, does that happen? Sure. But then I don't want people having to do that as well. I want automation. So how do I do that well? We do chargebacks. So people are responsible from a budgetary perspective. So of course there's an encouragement there. And then if we earn favorability, I track favorability by cost centers and business units, which almost gamifies it, because now people want to be, who's doing who's generating the most favorability versus an original budget or forecast. And it just automatically gets baked in. That's not really what I'm trying to do, but it definitely is a side effect of what's happened. But really, who's going to make the changes? Who's going to mitigate the costs? It's really down to the engineering level. And it's usually, here's what I'm seeing. I believe these belong to you. We have a decent tag governance to know, I know who the owners are. Here's a list of things that I'm seeing through our tooling of, here's opportunity, the needles in the haystack. Does this make sense? Do you recognize these? Oh, I sure do. Maybe they stopped instances, didn't realize there's a run rate on the volumes. Do we still need that infrastructure? No, let me go clean that up. Boom, that's done. And it's just a check-in, once a month. And I'm going to cut to the end of this. I don't want to have it be a human being that always is doing that. There's tooling to do automation. I want to automate the operational side of my job out of the way. I just want to deal on, I just love strategy and the implementation. So how do I automate that nonsense? So that's where I'm really trying to get to. That's that good state.
That's very interesting. And I can tell you that my experience is that too often FinOps gets too quickly into a tactical role, because you have to chase engineers, because you have to do, mapping waste or opportunities and stuff like that, while FinOps should be a strategic role, right? To drive the business ahead, to drive the value of the cloud. And sounds like you also have a very healthy relationship with your engineering counterparts. And tell me, Mike, like, what do you feel are pitfalls when you engage with engineers?
I would say the biggest challenge sometimes is when they want to do testing and they're uncertain of how, to me, it comes around this idea of safety. So we definitely push forward with risk. We are not risk averse. We are always attempting new ways of problem solving. At the same time, how do we do that in a safe space? And so that's just not FinOps, that's platform and security and what compliance, right? Everybody's getting plugged in. We have a fantastic mechanism for pipelines of how we deploy and provision in the cloud. So it makes my job easier because it's like, here's a centralized space for guardrails. But at the same time, it allows people to know that it's okay to sometimes fail and fail forward. And I think that helps with these conversations because now we're not trying to work in a vacuum. I'm afraid to make a mistake and then people find out. That's a difficult place to be in. And so if we live in a more open space that we are trying new things and it's accepted, and maybe there's going to be challenges of us not knowing how to do everything well, then it's easier to have these problems. And maybe they didn't tag right away the right way I wanted, and then I find it. And it's like, hey, how was this deployed? What were you thinking? What was the purpose of this? Is usually what it is. What was and I always want to assume good intent. And so that always helps. And if I come at it from that perspective and just trying to do an understanding, again, back to the being curious, it's a much easier conversation. I don't want it to be, I want to have people have the opportunity to I want to say behave well, but that sounds really like parent, but I believe you know what I mean. And then if it's not working like I wanted, is it a strategy issue? Was it a communication problem? How do I, improve this conversation? Because I don't want to keep having this. I would think they don't want to keep having this conversation. How do we get out of this pitfall? So I hope that makes sense. But in the end of the day, it's just a good idea of how to do this well, and then make sure that it was very well communicated.
Listen, Mike, you're shattering every stigma I had on enterprises. Start with talking about enjoying working with engineers, then continue to we're not risk averse, fail forward. That's great. That's a lot of inspiration for all of our listeners out there. And I actually want to double click on what you mentioned earlier about the fact that, you want to be more strategic. And the way to do that is implement more automation. So can you share with our listeners, how do you go about it? What type of automations you do? How you become more strategic as a FinOps leader?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say I don't need to solve all the world's problems on my own. So there's a humbleness to doing this real well, where I admit that I always don't know what the proper solution is, and that's fine. What I know, what I want is what I want in the end. So if I think of myself as a customer to platform, and I have this list of needs, and whether it be tagging governance or, raising modernized workloads, whatever that is, they may already have the idea that that's already baked into what they're trying to accomplish. So I would say I found the best success with just partnering with those leaders and figuring out how to do this really well and explaining this is where I think of, an evolution of our tagging. Most times we think of tags and FinOps is about billing and cost allocation. There's infrastructure tags, security tags, compliance tags. Your tags all over the place, right? We have like up to 40 keys on an instance at some point for a variety of reasons. So I'm not the only one demanding things. So be aware of that. And then at the same time, if you're not saying what you need, how are they going to help solve for what you need? And you want to go back in later and figuring out, why didn't they do what I wanted? Did you tell them what you wanted? So to me, it's these great conversations of explaining that. And what this turns into, I've mentioned the pipeline. Everything's baked into this. So whether it be through Terraform, CDK, whatever, however we're provisioning in the cloud, how do we establish those guardrails just at the get-go? And that way, if I'm an application build engineer, I don't need to know the magic behind the scenes. I just know it's asking me for some type of pivotal key to grab metadata, and it just does all the magic on its own. Awesome. Then I don't have to deal, then the build engineer is focusing on building business value from the business, PMO, what have you. And I'm not having to chase them to say, hey, now you've already deployed this. Now let's go fix it afterwards. How do we prevent all that? So that's where to me, the best part of strategy comes in, is back to the not doing the operational aftermarket release of fixing and resolving. Now we're just provisioning well. And now it's becoming, how do we keep scaling this better? Where there's always going to be gaps. So don't come in this thinking I've solved for this today. And oh no, we have to redo this in 2 to 3 years. Ideally, you're doing what you know best today. And that's not going to stay static in a couple of years. I said in the beginning of this conversation, it's evolving. And all of a sudden, there's a brand new way to doing this. There's either a new version from the cloud provider or what have you. And then you could go back and just, how do we modernize it again? So just keeping up with that instead.
That's a great advice. And Mike, today you manage a team of FinOps engineers, correct?
I would say we're analysts.
Analysts.
So
Analysts.
yeah, I could touch base to make it easier if you want.
So we've never talked about it in the past on the podcast, but I'm happy to hear from you about managing a team of FinOps analysts. So, for example, what do you delegate to your team, and what do you emphasize to your team versus what you do yourself? And that would be very interesting to hear.
Yeah, so I would say we have scaled as a FinOps org as the foundation. FinOps Foundation just released the new framework. We have paired with that somehow automatically. I would say my leadership has helped figure that out, so that's great as well. As you can tell, I've got good support, so it makes my life a lot easier. If you alluded to that, that clearly exists. As far as what we do as a team, we're doing invoice management. So anything that's invoicing on the technology side of the house, that's all us. We also do license management. So if you think of any licensing beyond the typical suite of, Outlook, Microsoft, that's us as well. So all those special tools you need for anyone in the organizations, both business and technology sides, we help govern that. And then at the same time, of course, we're doing cloud cost management. There's some SaaS consumption out there as well at the same time. As far as how do I propagate, how do you even manage this? Because it's a lot to boil. To me, it's this idea of staying in your lane of what you do really well, but also bridging where you've got some duplicate opportunities. So if I think of everything we do, the whole idea is like this total cost of running operations in the cloud. So that's definitely what we're trying to get to. I think if we had that North Star of like, why do all these things connect? It makes it a lot easier for somebody on the team to see, why am I doing this area of business? Why would I then start looking at, we're very big users of Spot. So the people that are doing the person on my team doing Spot analysis is also doing invoice management. So that's something I used to do. How do I offload that to somebody else? Why do we care about looking and analyzing any of that? So if you're unfamiliar with the spot market, it can fluctuate. It's a variable market. Makes it fun to forecast workloads because maybe the costs will change a little bit. Usage hours may be flat, but then costs, they may change a little. How do we help articulate that to our customers? So to me, it's about KPIs. I may be jumping way ahead, but I can't help myself. So KPIs help you just know what just happened. Does the analysis for you instantly? How do I help somebody in my team understand how do you leverage those mechanisms? So, automatically, how do you infer what's happened in the environment? So just, again, how do I help share how I would diagnose this?
And if we go back to the engagement with engineers, is that something that you keep for yourself, or do you encourage your team to go and have this active, ongoing engagement with the engineer organization as well?
Of course, I encourage it. I think sometimes it's the opportunity. And so my day job, I do a check-in once a month with different domains and cost center owners. And that includes senior engineers, usually the manager, maybe a director in there. So just a little bit of a, pocket of people that are responsible for these applications. I bring them in along the ride. And the whole idea with that is we understand what they're building, what their run rates are, what they correspond to as products. And so it makes it easier for us to understand, love these cloud providers with their billing. Keeps me in a nice little fun job here. And so thanks to that, at the same time, how do you then understand what are these rates? You have anomalies. How do you understand that? That's what those conversations are all about. So if we understand, here's an anomaly and it looks like it's related to this application and product, we now have met those folks that are likely responsible. I can talk to them. My team can talk to them. They're empowered as well. They can use the tooling. They've got an anomaly as well. They could go look at to see what's going on. So the idea is making sure they understand if it was an expected impact. And that's usually what that conversation is. And so just helping bridge those connections.
Very interesting. And Mike, I'm curious, sounds like you have a pretty, mature FinOps organization. You've been doing it for a while. What are your key challenges today?
Yeah, I want to make it clear. It may sound like we have all the things solved. Absolutely not. So I take pride in what we've accomplished, and it's tough. I'm not a perfectionist, so it's not like I'm not ever satisfied. I love how to make my job easy is really what I'm probably targeting, is what it probably sounds like. And that's definitely the idea. But I'm going to realize, we didn't account for something. And now how do we go back and fix that? And I want to be I like to be specific. I don't have these general ideas. So I talked about tagging. I have enough tags for me to at least get by. Is tagging a perfect state? Absolutely not. So we're trying to release an idea of tagging V2, just to hopefully down this fun tunnel. But normally think of tags as here's a fun happy key of name, application group owner, right? How do you evolve just the key itself to be something of a namespace so you understand the intention of that tag? So you have a source, the purpose of the tag, and then the tag key. So imagine that state. So that way it's very clear what that key is supposed to do. So if I need to propagate a value into that, and if we can have automation of plugin values, then I know as a engineer, what have you, that I know what's expected of that key. So that's part of it. The other thing is, how do I help folks that are, especially in the platform realm of testing and building out new infrastructure solutions, to knowing how big of a cost impact they may have and when to pull in FinOps? Again, I said this earlier, I don't want to get in the way of us moving forward, but at the same time, I want us to be responsible in the cloud. And we may not always know that enabling certain features on an AWS service may trigger what kind of cost impact. How do I help with them doing a cost calculator or us having to build a calculator for them to know what would be that impact? So that's sometimes a larger challenge is we didn't have a conversation. All of a sudden I see a spike. It looks like it's belonging to an application team, and reality is our own domain of platform that has triggered something. And maybe it was the request of the application team, but we didn't realize the impact it would have. So that's happening as well. But it just goes to the typical circle of how do we do the inform and awareness, and then, optimize it. And as long as we know it's happening, it's much easier conversation versus that surprise. And that's why I try to do these check-ins, because that makes it easier to know what's on the roadmap for our team.
Mike, I want to thank you for sharing your challenges. I can tell you that me personally, I go on all the FinOps X events and listen to all the keynotes and all the talks there, and everyone seems to have it all figured out. So the fact that, you're sharing some of your challenges here is very, very important thing for everyone that listens, and to me personally as well. I also wanted to double click on the fact that you are already 20 years at Choice Hotels, and this is your 10th role. So I assume since you're 20 years at Choice Hotel, you pretty like your workplace. And since you've done many roles in IT and beyond, I wonder how do you feel about the impact you're making today in FinOps versus the other roles you did in Choice?
Ooh, give me the tingles here. This is nice. Yeah, I'm really thinking back. Just to level set. So I started out at Choice as just like a technician, essentially. If you've looked, what Choice Hotels is a franchisee model, to give some context to this conversation. So what we help is the hotel franchisors to understand how to use our systems we're providing. So if you go to a hotel, you're going to experience a check-in process. There's systems to help with all that. So that's how I started with Choice. It's definitely fulfilling. And we even do an annual convention, which is actually, depending on the errors, but we do a convention every about May, April every year. I used to go to those, and I'd get this facing with the people that are using our products, understanding their challenges as well, which you're making me think, how do I get into this role? And I know those experiences made this FinOps role a whole lot easier, because the customer was clear. And at the same, as our franchisors, how do I help them do well? Because the better they do, the better we do. That's how the whole idea is. I evolved in that business side, going through a lot of different mechanisms of supporting our properties. I went into technology about 10 years ago. Half my roles were on the business side, half on the technology side. That's definitely made this job a lot easier, because I understand what it is we do as a business, if we have run rates in our infrastructure with AWS, how does that correlate to what we do as a business overall? It makes this a whole lot easier to manage, because I automatically have a sense of knowing if a large pocket of our dollars are going to certain products, I know instantly why that makes sense. So I have this inherent, the institutional knowledge of knowing what is good behavior while talking to an app team. And so it just makes those more of a fluid and easier conversation because of that longevity. And I know I'm talking about this idea of had this lovely state of having 2 decades, makes this job easier. I would hope if I went in even to a new company, that tying it back to the beginning of being curious, someone could achieve the same, right? If you understand what you're doing, is what you're trying to do as a company and where you're going, it just makes this so much easier to understand, tying it all back to run rates. And to keep going down this tunnel, if you don't mind. So I think of AWS and cloud providers as a solution for infrastructure. It's way beyond that now, right? So it's now solving for any business solutions. We're on both sides of the pillars of doing cloud services. And that's made it even more interesting because now we've got more of an analytics, even a little bit of AI going on the business side and marketing, versus if we were just a data center, I doubt that would be happening. So I would say public cloud has enabled us to be more, faster at provisioning solutions on both sides of the house.
And I can tell you that I share the same experience. I can tell the fact that we're using AWS and using their AI capabilities allows us to drive AI a lot faster. Is AI today an area of focus from FinOps perspective?
I would love to get there. So I talked about the idea of automating myself out of a job, agentic AI, creating solutions. Let's do it. Let's go. So, have I figured out how that's going to happen yet? No. Someone's going to figure it out this year. That's happening. And we'll just leverage that good behavior. Well, I'm sure we'll get guidance from AWS because, of course, they want us to grow with their services. Why not? So now we're going to have solutions from them on how to do that well. I know Gen AI is really popular, but I think agentic AI is really going to be a bigger footprint, especially for doing FinOps. If I think of what does that really mean? So I think of if I was multi-cloud, how would I know where to provision a workload to be most cost effective and available? So rather than somebody like me doing an analysis or my team, a tooling can do that for us. If I'm trying to figure out other solutions of where, if we're trying to run different types of workloads, where does that make sense? If it's from a security perspective. So I think some of those conversations are going to be easier handled, even estimating workloads. So I do most of the forecasting for the technology side for cloud consumption. How do I get that through, beyond typical linear or, some type of formula to figure out where are we going in a couple of years? Doing regression models, all that nonsense. Can a tool do that for me? Of course. Give it the data it needs. So that's where I see it really going.
So sounds like you feel like in the next 5 years, a lot of the things that you do today manually will be replaced by AI agents.
Absolutely.
Okay. You're not scared. Not scared.
And you have to evolve, right? You can't get in the way. It's happening. So you're either on the train or you're getting off. I need to go find something else to do. And we're always going to need humans. To me, I see these as tools, and we'll see how well that really plays out. But if I see this as just another tool to do our jobs well, then I'm focused more on the strategy side. Is that tool going to know how to implement strategy and work with other humans to implement products and enhancements? Yeah, I don't know if it'll really get there. So if that's the case, then I still have a purpose. And if so, great. I mean, I doubt it's not received well of how much I love doing what I do. So
I totally agree. And I wonder, Mike, how do you see the FinOps role in 5 years from today with AI and everything that's happening?
Ooh, that's fun. At the core of it, what I see is we do this idea of awareness first. So the informed stage, I see that being automated. I think it really comes back to how well you're provisioning and tagging and marking things in the cloud to know, understanding what their intent and purpose is, and bridging that ability together. So it goes back to data. As long as it's got the data, it could definitely bridge those capabilities. I'm sure tooling is going to get better to start adopting into that mindset versus me manually creating chargeback allocation strategies through a tool, or even the cost anomaly detection will be smarter because of that. I think what we really want is a happy, fun, steady run rate in the cloud that's predictable and interpretive of what it exactly represents. I think tooling is going to help us through AI to understand that extremely well. What it'll help empower is finance. So today I act as this idea between the product and the costs and, through invoices of interpreting the results. So I feel like that's what I'm really doing today with finance. That could be automated through AI. Here's exactly what these different divisions represent. Here's the products they represent within our company. It's very intuitive. So all of a sudden that conversation is a lot easier. And maybe then it turns into more of that strategy side of where do we see us going and putting investment dollars and seeing and doing some type of predictability to understand the cost impact. That's where I probably see this really going.
Okay, I'll guess time will tell.
I want to flip it. Are you willing to share what you think?
I have a lot of thoughts, but honestly, I just want to hear you, Mike. So let's stick to what you have to tell them. I have to say, I definitely feel that this role is becoming more and more strategic over time. I think this is where the role should go. I believe that FinOps is a leadership role more than anything else, and leadership is not going anywhere, and AI will only accelerate that. So that's what I think in a nutshell. So, Mike, let's get to the second part of the episode, the more fun part, to talk about you. So today you live in Orlando, Florida, correct?
I do.
I think your background alluded to that a bit with Donald Duck and other.
This is Darkwing Duck. If you don't recognize that guy, we got Mickey and Minnie these are from, there's an art festival that happens once a year at Disney that I've acquired some pieces. There's others in the room that you can't see.
Okay, interesting. And what brought you to Orlando? Because originally you're from South Dakota.
Yeah, I hail from South Dakota. So near the Black Hills, got to represent. So of all the Dakotas, I would say South Dakota's the best, just to get a little, just having fun. No. Yeah, I'm from South Dakota. I was raised for most of my years in Arizona. And I took a family vacation in 2015 to Walt Disney World. And it was a phenomenal experience. I got to then propose to, my now wife in that trip. So the layers of joy just kept getting stacked. And Disney was like, oh, that seems like a fun thing. That's a bucket list item, right? No, it turned into a once a year vacation. All of a sudden, all our planning was around Disney World. And not like that's the only thing we did. I want to make it very clear. We enjoyed Arizona. We enjoy family, but going to that trip, it became, well, we really enjoyed this. And we took one of the vacations in 2019, I believe it was exploring Orlando. Like, could we live here? Yep. He definitely loved the atmosphere. My wife loves beaches. I'm like Anakin Skywalker, where I'm not really into the sand, but the water's great. So, there's a lot to do in this state that really exemplifies what we like to do for fun. Figured out through COVID, had to move here, been here for now 3 years. We're not just Disney adults. We enjoy Universal. There's the Kennedy Space Center, NASA is out there on the East Coast. Lots of things to do. So, and just, happy, fun weekends now.
And the winters, of course.
The winters.
Absolutely. And I also went to Orlando for my first time exactly a year ago. And it was amazing. Also, the Kennedy Space Center, it was an amazing experience. And I would also like to give a warm recommendation on going to swim with the manatees in the winter, which was an amazing experience as well. I can tell that while I was there, I was also considering moving to Orlando myself. So I can definitely relate. And, so Mike, what do you do outside of work for fun? Maybe besides going to Disney World?
I will qualify it besides the parks. To be fair, we go to all of them. I love to read. So I would say the fun reading I do is with epic fantasy novels. So if you're familiar with Brandon Sanderson and his Cosmere, he writes ridiculously sized books that you will enjoy for at least a month. I guess it depends how fast you read, but we're talking thousands of pages each. So that's a fun place to be. On the nonfiction side, I want to just give one that I feel had the best impact in my life. It was Permission to Screw Up. And that's from Kristen Hadid. It's a quick read, and it somehow made sense to me. I read a lot of nonfiction, just to figure out where can I elevate myself, right, to evolve. But that's the one that spoke loudest to me of how to think about the world differently.
And can you give us one pointer from the book that you took with yourself?
It almost ties to this whole conversation, and I didn't mean to make it that way, but I guess it's going to be a nice bookend. So the idea was making bad assumptions. And from those bad assumptions, not being curious enough to know how to problem solve, work with your team effectively, and even others. And so the book, it is kind of a generational focus of working with a younger generation and making odd assumptions of how they would operate within a team. But I don't want to give too much away of the book, but that's kind of the essence was being out loud about where you've struggled and challenges and how you faced them and overcame them. And not as we need to always have success out of that, but if you did, what made you think differently and how do you, figure that out better in the future? I would say it focuses more on that, which again aligns to what we're talking about now.
Absolutely. And really, really important point. Great, Mike. This has been a fantastic talk that I personally learned a lot. If people want to reach out to you and ask more questions, what is the best way to do that?
This is going to sound like a surprise. Through LinkedIn.
Great. That's great. So guys, if you have some questions to Mike, LinkedIn is the way to go. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today.
Likewise. Thank you for having me. Amazing conversation.
For sure. And if you enjoyed it or learned something new, exactly like I did, please subscribe and tell your friend about the podcast. Mike, thank you again. This has been another fascinating episode of FinOps in Action. See you next time. That wraps up another episode of FinOps in Action. Thank you for joining. For show notes and more, please visit finopsinaction.com. This show is brought to you by Point 5, empowering teams to optimize cloud costs with deep detection and remediation tools that drive action.